Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jacks Miller. So Friday, September 19, 2025 was officially the last day in office of now former DPP Paula Llewellyn, and she joins us now for the full hour. Before we go to her though, she spoke to my colleague Anthony Lugg about her departure.
Thank you, Jamaica, for your support and your love. I would always appreciate it.
Director of Public Prosecutions Paula Llewellyn during a sit-down with TVJ News some 48 hours before her tenure comes to an end. Ms. Llewellyn was appointed Jamaica's first female DPP in 2008, but her journey as prosecutor began long before that. Combined, she served 40 years. She led a sweeping transformation of the office, digitizing operations and strengthening prosecutorial procedures. Under her leadership, the office of the DPP grew from a unit of about 20 prosecutors in 2008 to more than 50 in 2018.
In the meeting office, I can tell you that we have received approval to go up to 70 prosecutors, which will make us the biggest agency in the Caribbean.
But her journey was not without challenges. Among the landmark cases, her office led the Vibes Cartel murder trial, the Christopher Dudus Coke extradition, the Traffic Guru case, among others. Her critics have not been very kind.
I have had to deal with the slings and arrows coming from both sides at different times. But as I told you before we started this interview, I have always considered myself to be an independent-minded person. And having been a first, I recognized that I must never be captivated by my gender. And this is why I love to coin the phrase that to be a good professional in this sphere, you have to have mental toughness, or what I like to call testicular fortitude. It transcends gender, and a broad back.
I'm going to have to remind myself not to say Madame DPP, but thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it. So there are some phrases that we've heard from you over the years, that you have to have a broad back to withstand the slings and the arrows. And you speak, of course, about your favorite phrase, testicular fortitude. It's really important as a public figure not to get swallowed up by the negativity. And so I can understand why you've said that. But is it also possible that in barricading yourself against that negativity, you also shut out feedback that could have been useful and that could have perhaps helped you to course correct or do things differently?
Not at all, because if you look at my history, all over Jamaica, I accept invitations to speak at service club functions, graduations. I've been guest speaker and given motivational speeches at so many different events. And this helps me to be right up close to the people and to talk with them generally, and hear what people will have to say. When I talk about testicular fortitude and having a broad back, it means that though you can have a split screen where you can understand the angst of the court of public opinion, nonetheless, especially in very sensitive matters, it may have sensitivities in terms of security. It may have sensitivity in terms of, to coin a Jamaican phrase, whichever way you turn as a matter of law, if the law allows it, Maka is going to juke you. So having the testicular fortitude is just basically to make sure that your mind is in the right place to do what the law says is the right thing to do, even though the court of public opinion may wish you to do otherwise.
A lot of times people in the court of public opinion, as you're alluding to, don't necessarily know the law and what the law says you should and should not do.
And I am operating in the age of social media. No other DPP has had to deal with that.
And I'm going to come to that. But a lot of people who are more knowledgeable of the law don't always think you made the right decision. So for instance, you've always spoken very frankly about the importance of the prosecutor's office, the prosecutor as being a quote-unquote minister of justice, meaning you're not supposed to be running down convictions, you're supposed to be acting in the public interest and wherever justice would lead you. But there have been criticisms either that you haven't prosecuted where you should or you've prosecuted where you shouldn't. Let me just give you one specific example. For instance, the notorious Irwin rape case, 2012. Terrible case. 4 women and an 8-year-old child raped. 2 brothers were charged with the rapes, and public sentiment against them was so strong. At first, they couldn't even get a lawyer. It was that bad. DNA tests showed they were not a match for the rapists. Didn't place them at the scene, but in what a lot of people thought was a travesty of justice, your office said they were proceeding with the prosecution. And in fact, not only were they not found guilty in 2013, in 2014, DNA implicated another man entirely. Do you look back on that as a mistake?
You know, the unfortunate thing with a lot of what I call the social media judges and prosecutors and police officers and defense counsel is that they never have the file with all the statements to look at. A prosecutor, you have to make a judgment call, which is why in the Leone Allen matter, the Privy Council said that when a seasoned prosecutor makes a decision not to prosecute or to prosecute, once there's a viable case, it's not easily disturbed in terms of judicial review. That was a matter that I would say was on the borderline. When you looked at the statements, the complainants were quite clear in respect of their identification, because the evidence was, in terms of the statements, that the faces of their assailants, especially during the sexual act, was inches away from their face. That is the evidence on paper. Now, in respect of the prosecution of the matter, remember the prosecution has to put up the case that is the best available material. You have the rules of evidence, the judge has a duty. So you have the eyewitnesses saying one thing, you have scientific evidence saying possibly another. I have done cases where the scientific evidence in terms of what is the basis in terms of some issue to do with what was examined was not correct. So what we decided to do was to put everything out there in the wash, because as a matter of law, there are safeguards at every step of the way. And by the time the 2 ladies gave evidence, their credibility, I think one of them especially, the credibility under cross-examination was found so wanting that as a matter of law, in terms of what the case law on credibility says, we were obliged to offer no further evidence. So there are safeguards along the way, but you have to balance that with the fact that the public in Irwin, they would have been aware that the witnesses, in terms of the scenario that they are telling, in respect of what happened, they were face to face with one person on top of them. That is what they're saying. We weren't there. So it is better in terms of the public interest of the public in Irwin, and knowing that you have safeguards in the rules. Let it all come out in the wash, and that is exactly what happened.
In this case, though, because what you're describing as public interest, with respect, sounds a little bit more like pandering to public opinion.
Not at all, not at all.
In a situation where you had DNA.
No, but I'm saying to you, in my experience, I am the first prosecutor in Jamaica to use DNA in a case called Bernard Chang.
I'm aware. I was
right?
wanting to
I'm
be
the
at the time.
first person, and it was a very difficult case to prepare because it had never been ventilated in the courts. So I know about DNA evidence, but as I said, it's a balancing act. And sometimes, just like the judges and sentencing, it's a balancing act. And it was one of what I would call a borderline case. So we had to put ourselves in a situation where everything would came out into the wash. It's all well and good, and it's so easy. You know, I set myself the task of opening up the office and giving access. But it is a double-edged sword, because so you give access, you have social media, and you know the saying that sometimes a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Persons may opine or give an opinion, but you don't have the advantage that we would have, which is to have the entire file before you.
Couple of things, because you're being respectfully a little bit dismissive there of critics.
I'm not being dismissive, but
this was not coming from the social media massive alone. A lot of this was coming from learned people with lots of legal
who had read the file.
In the community.
Had they read the file?
But you yourself use the word borderline.
Did any of the persons giving the criticism? Come on. I came here in peace. Did any of these persons criticize it? Yes or no? Did any of them read the file? Unless they had read the file and all the statements, interviewed the witnesses, I would ask them to give way to the professionals who did. Okay?
You use the word borderline. If you have a borderline case, should the benefit not be in favor of them?
No, because you have the public interest. You have eyewitnesses who were assaulted in the most egregious way, who are saying in their statement that these men were on top of me, inches away from my face. That is what their statements are saying. What would we say to those witnesses? What would we say to those witnesses?
So at this point, 2025, you look back and you still believe that?
I probably would have made the same decision.
Okay.
Because we have the witnesses, the pendulum of justice. Gone are the days where the pendulum of justice only swings in the direction of the accused. The victims have rights. And if the law allows everything to come out in the wash, then that is where the balance will be kept.
Okay, we're at our first break. You're listening to former Director of Public Prosecutions, Paula Llewellyn. Remember our WhatsApp line, 876-254-0693, 876-254-0693. So come.